Hello, hello. Oh, now it's working. Great. Okay, we got audio. Okay, so we have audio. So I can answer questions now. Thank you, everyone, for waiting for me to press the audio control on my desktop to turn on the microphone. Dev is here, Boris is here, a few others. Thank you for joining on Friday. Hopefully we can get through some interesting topics. I saw Dev was experimenting with event modeling, looking at it. So it would be interesting to see what questions Dev has. And looking at ONote specifically. So that's a really good route to take because that's built for event modeling. Most people end up starting with basically Miro and just drawing squares and rectangles and joining them with arrows, which is more freeform. But as we move forward, especially with what we're seeing with ChatGPT, just imagine a standard notation for event modeling, being able to train some models, and you just create an event model, and on the other side out comes the software you want, provided you gave it enough examples in the event model to show how it works. So we're going to have a really incredible 2023, given what's gone on with ChatGPT and everything else. I noticed, Dev, you're also looking at event storming. Do you have any questions maybe that you came across as you're experimenting with these different methodologies? So I think that would be good to cover. I can also just go through my Twitter stream and see what questions popped up over the last month and go over those to answer them. Otherwise, I may try to figure out how this live stream in YouTube works. This is the first time that I've done this without OBS or anything else, just linking straight to the cam. Probably will be limited. I usually do this on a desktop PC. This is coming on my laptop. So didn't really figure out, how to connect the webcam, the proper one on it. So I have to deal with my laptop quality fidelity, but we're here for questions and answers for a couple of hours or so, maybe not as much, but I thought I would make myself available for those around the world that want to get some answers directly from me. So, hi, Za, hello. Interesting how you use ChatGPT for event modeling. So I'm exploring it currently. We haven't used it at all yet. Part of it is the way that ChatGPT is a natural language and definitions type of model underneath. So you have to be very specific to use something that that it would have in its training data to give it reliable stuff. And I know that you can tailor things, but yeah. So that's there's a lot of unanswered questions for me as well in terms of how AI is going to move event modeling forward. I knew that it would. I knew that we were very, very close to moving to auto-generated code for entire solutions, where we're getting rid of 80 to 90% of the coding simply because of the format that event modeling does. It is information complete, which means there's a bit of rigor in event modeling, especially once you get into the permutations of data, like with the given when-thens and the given thens for your green boxes and your blue boxes. If an event model has a standard notation, this is where authors of ONote like Bobby, so Dev, you've probably caught up with Bobby about ONote, hopefully. They're working on standards for a standard way to encode event models. And if that becomes something that backs up any event model out there, we'll start to get really incredible training data for how different teams around the world are expressing an event model for very common things like logins and logouts and ratings, but also some industry specific things. So you might start to see some insurance company patterns pop out. And, when someone's doing underwriting and they kind of put together how they want their website to look like and what information they're capturing, then I can see AI picking up the similarities between other insurance companies that already did that and pick up the common data points and carry them across as fields and the events, etc. But also augment that with anything custom that was, the outlying 10, 20% for that particular company. So, we're kind of at the end of the road for a lot of the meaningless work for developers, especially with event modeling, because it ties the loop in with the specifications and the business interests to be a lot closer to exactly what happens at the code level. Thanks for the new setup. Yeah, this is the new office. So the green screen was supposed to arrive today, so there'll be one behind me next time, and the proper camera is going to be used next time, and also a proper desktop PC instead of my laptop for the next time. So this is, I guess, just over a month of having the new place, and it was kind of not usable, obviously, because setting up furniture and everything else was taking time. And cleaning out the old place took time. So this place hasn't really been used for probably more than 3 weeks on a solid effort anyway. And we had a business trip for a week, so we weren't here for a week. But it'll look much nicer as the days go by. Thank you for the comment on the new setup. I see a tile is kind of out of place in the ceiling there. That's probably from me trying to find how to turn the water heater on in here and other things. That's much nicer than the old office. Thanks for asking. So if there's no other questions, I'm just going to go to through my Twitter and multiple monitors are okay with Ubuntu. I mean, there's always the Xorg stuff. It depends if you're using something a little bit more customizable, like Kubuntu. KDE seems to have enough controls that if you really want it set up the way it wants to work properly, you can. But Xorg is still a problem with high definition on a large screen versus high definition on the laptop screen, simply because the scaling factor and how you drag windows is still kind of clumsy. Although I wouldn't say that it's anything beyond what you'd have problems with Mac or PC. From what I've seen people struggle with, PC is probably the one that's got it the best, but I really don't care. All the things that I care about work just fine on both monitors, and I try not to have too much of a neck swivel workflow. I'm usually alt-tabbing and keyboard within one view, and the most I'll do is probably half screens and rarely quarter screens or 2 quarters and a half for what I do. So the multiple monitor setup is not a high priority, and the minute I have a desktop in here, it's just going to be this one monitor anyway. I think multiple monitors of a standard desktop are a no-brainer. Like, they'll work just fine unless you're doing something crazy like mismatching sizes of monitors. But yeah, generally have it on no scaling for a large monitor for 4K, and it works. I believe it or not, I'm nearly 50, and I can still read without reading glasses, which is lucky. So I generally have a very small, fine print, and people always made fun of me throughout my whole life for insisting on tiny fonts to get more code on the screen. I always wanted to have more context when I'm editing code, so I hate white space. Not like most other developers that seem to like braces on their separate lines and all that. I want to cram in as much info with the tiniest font as possible, and just jump around from keywords to see what's happening. I don't know. I don't know what time. Like I think it's 2010 with the Ruby on Rails. Um, Millennials, entitled Millennials wanted things to look pretty. I'm not from that generation, so I never appreciated it. Anyway, enough of a rant, kind of a sidebar here, but I'm very happy to hear that there's Linux questions on here, because that's all I use for everything day to day. Any event modeling or event sourcing or event driven questions? Otherwise, if no one's got any questions, I'll pop into Twitter to see what I can dig out there. And I can't seem to figure out how to share my screen on this silly thing. So maybe I'll take a minute here to quickly ask ChatGPT how I do that. I've been using it way more than Google. So hopefully, and I tried to actually pay for my ChatGPT thing. It popped up for me to upgrade my plan, but unfortunately, the thing doesn't take Canadian credit cards, so I had to wait until the OpenAI folks do that. So yeah. So Dev, how do you? Let's see what your question is here. How do you separate the different event streams from each other, or how do you decide which event goes into which stream? Great question. So generally, the streams are used for separate subsystems. So a lot of times in event sourcing circles, you'll have a lot of people that are coming in from domain-driven design, and they'll start to add words like bounded contexts and domains, etc. I think for most of the audience that wants to do systems design, that kind of obscures what they what they will understand, and makes them have to pick up a book and start to read about those things. But really, it's about organizing information where it lives. So in an event model, events live in a stream that tells you which server or which logical service they belong to, most likely a store of those events. So if you have 3 streams generally in an event model, it means you have 3 subsystems, most likely housed in 3 different databases to host those events. And so that's one of the aims of event modeling, is to show how information exists over time in a set of subsystems and an overall system. You can further subdivide those streams to show individual entities. For example, if you want to show some concurrency issues of a couple of accounts competing for a transfer, money transfer, or whatever, you can start to subdivide those streams and show the interplay between those. So yeah, a really good question. Those streams at the bottom, those swim lanes at the bottom of an event model, show how the system captures information and where that information lives. It also serves a purpose to show where you will host the logic for a projection, like a green box that shows you your total account balance or something like that. They all have to come from the same system, so that when you're implementing, you know where to host that logic, and then it becomes a map of where you find things. So if I have a bug in this report, I can follow the lines, and okay, this report gets its information from these streams, which is this system, so I know where to go to go and fix the problem. So in terms of how you separate them, it's really, you start to, instead of trying to make abstractions that make sense, you start to listen to the information flow and say, okay, well, there's a lot of information going back and forth between these 2 concepts in this workflow. We probably should house this together, unless there's other reasons not to, like storage. Maybe some of them are large documents. Maybe a lot of these events are high frequency, they happen every second, whereas the other thing is kind of auxiliary, and these events happen once a day. It doesn't make sense to house them in the same service, or they do, because they have to interact all the time. So this is where you allow the flow of information to dictate those things. You're less kind of armchair architect thinking, oh, this sounds better together, and we're going to have these base classes for this, and therefore this should live together. it's really removing the subjectivity out of designing information systems and really sticking to where the information is, which parts are coupled to it, do they make sense to be housed together, are we adding too many services because now we have to translate between the different swim lanes and show this pub sub or RPC calls or whatever between them to get them across these boundaries. So you get to make those decisions based on the events and the contents. And I use the word events loosely because it's really just capturing new information the system is storing at that point in time. And so you can make up your mind as to where you want it to live. So that's how I kind of describe that. But and we have, sorry, 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry, just looking at how to share a screen because I want to share a screen, but hopefully my verbal descriptions are good enough for now. As I'm talking, you can go to eventmodeling.org to just look at an event model and look at the streams down below. The orange stickies on that documentation will show you what I'm talking about. But I hope, Dev, that answers how to separate the different streams. It's really just what you would draw on a component diagram with regular rectangles. I have an inventory system and I have a point of sale system beside it. It's those in UML. If you have a component diagram, each component is a stream essentially here. Event modeling just stretches that out over a timeline so you have context within which to understand how that component is interacting with other systems, screens, etc. And when information within that component is changing, right? What is the state? We really ignored state for a long time in this industry, and it's a much better backbone for understanding systems than abstracted boxes and arrows for concepts. So if you tie things to real data and really take that behavior-driven development approach to architecture, just show by example how data moves through the system, you'll clearly understand what it is. You're not going to get sidelined with esoteric concepts that Martin Fowler wrote about in big, thick books that make people look smart. This is all just the same things we did on pen and paper for thousands of years for 99% of the systems we're working with out there. So that's, yeah. Oh, sorry. Mic issues. Can you hear me? Let me just see. Let me test. Also want to upgrade the connection here to be gigabit. Maybe if you have video on, maybe that's draining the connection. Yeah. Also would be nice to get wired connection to Ethernet here instead of Wi-Fi. So again, new office, not everything is done yet. So I'm sorry if there's mic issues. It's probably just throughput that's suffering here.
Did you move the mic?
Yeah. So let me just see.
You're better now, but there's a lot of interference. It's probably it's your fan.
Is it my fan? Maybe I just put the mic closer. Let me just see. Is this better? Is the gain maybe not enough? Let's see. Hopefully that's better. A lot of interference. Yeah, that's probably the fan and me moving stuff around on the desk. And like I said, new office, so there'll be a microphone arm in here. There's going to be better internet in here. It's just tough to set all this up while still doing client work and developing all these things and running a business. So yeah, hopefully this is the year that we have, more people in to do that kind of stuff. Let's see. Okay, great. So we had 27 people sign up, but we don't really have anyone in there. Add a comment. I'm just gonna post that comment in there. That should get more people in here. Yeah. So it's kind of odd. We always get a lot of people signing up for this, and then we only have a few people that show up. But that's okay. That means you have my attention and all of that. So next question. How do you ensure one subscription to the event store per projection in a multi-instance load-balanced environment? Well, that's a mouthful. Okay, let's unwind that question. So one subscription to the event store per projection. So if your projection, generally we have one thread ever looking after a projection, and that's how we ensure it. So if you're connecting to an event store, you make sure there's a catch up and subscribe method on there. Implement one yourself if you're using a traditional database for your events, but you want an API endpoint to basically say, I've missed these events because I went offline for a little bit, catch me up, and then continue sending me more updates. And, we used to do that through long polling, and these days it's WebSockets and other things that are, more stream-based for getting information. But if we have load balance situations, this is where we would generally bubble that up to some business division as to, why we would have certain things housed in different servers. We haven't really needed to do a lot of that. So I think there's, in that question, there's a lot of, well, what if this happens, and how do we scale this? And those questions are usually kind of the premature optimization questions. The nice thing about event sourcing is that you're not really painted in the corner. Whenever we had an issue, there's an easy way to just reframe the problem and start using events in a different way, and divide them up into some sort of tenants or federation, where you would have proper fan out to be able to distribute the workload. So there's no real one answer for that heavy question there. Multi-instance load balanced. The nice thing about read models, and what you're implying here with projections, is that a lot of the same scaling tools and patterns that you use in traditional systems work just the same for event source systems. 80% of the development on the read side in a event source system, where you're getting projections of that, is using very traditional approaches. So it's generally not an issue for moving forward. But yeah. Let's get back to Dev's follow-up to his question here. So it looks like the separation happens elsewhere and is simply represented in event modeling instead of the event model being the place where you can discover those boundaries. No, you can discover them in event modeling. I just want you to understand that event modeling allows you to really understand how information flow and how workflows affect your abstractions. Because if you look at something like the first step of just brainstorming events, that's great. That gives you some granular kind of abstractions that you can use. But really, the real hard work is understanding whether those abstractions are actually useful and those boundaries are actually useful. You start to ask yourself, am I putting too much information in this event? Should this event be smaller and then have additional events to decorate the system with more data. So the separation doesn't necessarily have to happen elsewhere. It's a back and forth. It's like, is this implementation, are we using event modeling now to kind of document how we have our systems running? Then yeah, it's more of a documentation. Event modeling there is used to document what's going on in the system. But if we're building a system from the beginning, there's this idea that you start to really understand where information is supposed to be, how the state changes, whether it makes sense to have one or two or three logical separations or physical separations between where the data lives, one database, two databases, what are the pros and cons. In our experience, prematurely optimizing these things is just cost us effort and made things more expensive. We got some benefits of it down the road, but they were minimal. Separating a point of sale system from an inventory system for something that didn't need a lot of scaling was not the best thing, right? We discovered that even though it looks good on paper, that we have these two separate systems, it added a lot more moving parts because you needed to now do pub sub or RPC calls from both systems to make them talk to one another all together. But from the way the business was described, et cetera, it looked like, okay, these are two logical things that are separate. We treat inventory for different workflows in the back room, whatever. We treat point of sale with different workflows. They're at the front of the store. That's all it's dealing with. In the end, keeping them together would have been just fine for scaling. If there was another implementation or another deployment of that solution that required way more throughput or something, or was on an international scale, you could have moved those two pieces apart quite easily. I think we learned the wrong lessons from the traditional approach, where we were really afraid of painting ourselves in a corner, and that's where all the architect jobs came up and whatever. But there's a core issue of missing from all of this is that there was no recourse or tracing back as to how things happened, which you get with event sourcing. That makes that kind of a moot point more so, because you can really delay those architectural divisions to a point where it's there's a responsible time. So Dev, I'm not sure if you want to refine that question. I'm not sure if I answered it quite well enough for you, but feel free to post an update and I'll try to do that. Yeah. So I'm glad the microphone's working better. We'll keep working on this. I'll get proper OBS studio set up and all of that. Yeah. Okay, so is there something in event modeling notation that allows events to be marked as belonging to the same event stream? I try to do that with some sort of identifier. Like if you're talking about a profile, you might have ID, but I use something it's more human readable. So I can say that I'll just use the surrogate key of email as being the ID, even though the implementation may actually have a GUID or a regular ID or whatever. So that's one way in terms of notation. So in terms of having the same event stream, there's also just physically subdividing the stream to have more lines in between. So if I have account 1, that could be used in one row and account 2 in another. But overall, both of these are within thicker lines that denote that this is, I don't know, the finance system or whatever. So you can, like I said earlier, you can subdivide more swim lanes that are just helpful to say that I have these 3 entities and I can have 3 substreams within a system to show the events from each one and how they interact with one another over time. So In terms of notation, you can use surrogate keys. I mean, if you have a highly technical project, you can probably use IDs, but you try to make them stand out so that they're more traceable visibly. But there is no like asterisk or some other symbol that I would put next to it. I mean, you can always annotate the event model with other things, and we often do that. We will have notes as to on this screen, these are some of the details that just are not worth elaborating. We'll just write it in, make sure that this is a drop down that dynamically pulls this data or something. I don't know. SLAs, sometimes we put a red arrow that these, this transaction must take no more than 2 seconds, so that developers don't go and throw that into a batch job that's at midnight. Things like that. So we make some notations on top of the event model to be more clear about some things that just we don't want to mess up the event model to put in 5 different more permutations or something. But yeah, or just non-functional things like non-state things like SLAs. So okay, great. So I've answered it, hopefully. Yeah, and I'm glad that you're having fun with it. That I noticed, Dev, you joined the Slack channel for event modeling. So there's a lot of good people that have been there for years now that can answer things. They do pop in here and there. I try to pop in there as well to answer things. So if you don't have to wait for these Ask Me Anythings, try to them at least once a month. It's nice to kind of answer things on camera, but also just that Slack channel's generally good. And if I'm not there, there's usually a couple of people that know, and a lot of them have different backgrounds with different implementations of event-driven architectures. So they can also give you their perspective from something that I haven't done yet. We don't really do Kafka. There might be a few people there if you're doing things with a pub sub over Kafka. I'm sure there's others there that have more experience than I do with it. So, that's always good to do that. And you're quite familiar with event storming. Yeah, I saw that you're doing the event storming stuff. So you've gone into the deep end of domain-driven design and event storming. So the relationship between event storming and event modeling is that the workshop format from Alberto Brandolini was something that fit perfectly with event modeling, that you could use, this collaborative environment to have people from different parts of the organization, people representing the business stakeholders, and the people that are doing implementation, support, testing, all the different roles can kind of stand together, look at a solution, and discuss it and come up with a good design and understand, how information is going to flow through the system, and really agree that, yeah, if we see these sequence of screens, these wireframes actually are going to happen, we can follow the data and see that it is a realistic way of thinking about the system, that it could work this way. We're not making up data from thin air. We know where it comes from. This is part of the unique proposition from event modeling, is that you can do what's called information completeness, and that means you can follow these data points through the whole entire workflows and understand that you're not going to have to go back and ask questions of where do I get this data, what integration is missing, why am I missing these fields, why is the screen trying to show something that doesn't yet exist in the system. Which is generally what happens with projects. We say, oh, just get on with it, and we've never actually gone through and asked ourselves, do we actually understand what we're asking for, or are we just going to try and make Agile kind of force us to ask those questions? And that's not an ideal situation, which is why I'm always kind of ranting about not enough design being put in terms of software projects. As we want to be called engineers, but we're not doing the design part of any other engineering discipline. I'm not saying don't be iterative, just don't start until you have the best idea of what you're going to do. Of course, you're going to get feedback on changes in approach or additional features that are discovered that are needed, then you're going to have to iterate, quote unquote. But waterfall was never meant to be big design up front. It was supposed to be iterative as well. So yeah, get design back in there. So yeah, back to the point. Yeah, event storming had that idea of bringing people together to discuss those things. So in a way that's collaborative and people can talk about it. It just goes much deeper than event storming into using behavior-driven development and specification as an example, or specification by example to talk about those things. So hopefully that answers it. And I'm glad you're doing those series. If you want to do one on event modeling, I'm happy to help with that. You can translate everything in DDD to an event model. So wherever you have, if you're studying domain-driven design, you're looking at something like aggregates. Well, you can see that these can be represented by a stream. If you're looking at anti-corruption layers, you can see that the automation gears that I put in, you can see exactly what those anti-corruption layers do to fix up the data, transform it, filter it, or whatever on both sides before it leaves the service boundary and just before it enters another service internally, right? So you have places for those things in an event model. And a lot of people that I've worked with were really big on domain-driven design. And so I needed to make sure that event modeling had everything represented properly. And it's actually not that I made event modeling to be domain-driven design. We were doing domain-driven design, and event modeling fell out of trying to do domain-driven design without the time to teach people about domain-driven design. So we still had to have the same success and same concepts and architectural integrity and everything else that domain-driven design gives. But we had to do it in a way that we couldn't teach people domain-driven design. There's just not enough time or money to do that. So event modeling is kind of a notation for the end goal of domain-driven design. And so if you start to use that notation, you'll organically learn domain-driven design without learning any of the concepts or reading any of the books. So there's plenty of people out there that are incredibly happy with event modeling, making incredibly nice systems that are, properly coupled. They're organized, they're maintainable, they're event sourced, and they haven't touched domain-driven design literature, yet they're building exactly what domain-driven design teaches. So it's kind of a cheat sheet for domain-driven design. Yeah, and like anything, and in fact, event storming and event modeling are quite compatible because the core concept of an event on timeline is kind of what you can get from event storming. At least with event storming, you can get concepts that people are trying to capture as events that happened, and then just event modeling takes you that next step to be more diligent about, like, okay, well, name the properties in here. Can you actually attach data to this and see that they all connect? And once you do that, then it's actually a really good set of requirements for people to start development, right? That was a big problem. We ran into a lot of teams that did event storming, and then they didn't have a good way to pass off all that learning as requirements to the development teams. Like, it was all great. And in fact, the first stage of event storming is always just to have that one-day workshop and then just throw stuff away, because the value was just people interacting. And so event modeling is different. We don't throw things away. We make that the set of blueprints to follow to implement whole solutions and keep driving more insight from those activities and make those artifacts live on and support further thought. So hopefully that makes sense. Oh, so we have another question. How do you decide which events to store in event sourcing and which to store as data, considering that event sourcing is good for aggregate state changes, but not for logging events. Yeah, so do we have events that we don't store in Event Store? Yes. There's a few flavors of them. One is being not logging events, but real world events. So if you're doing a point of sale system that's automating a store, I'd have one stream at the top that would have the physical world or in real life, and you could put those in there: customer enters store, customer leaves store, and that gives you bookends to a process. So you can say, okay, when they're in the store, all this stuff is happening. They're going to till, scanning items, whatever. That's one way. Logging events. So what happens with once you start doing event source systems, logging changes a little bit. So the type of logging that you do in traditional systems kind of stops being as important, because business activity monitoring is way better than traditional logs of like what actually hit a server or whatever. You'll still have those. You'll have them at the infrastructure level. Did I have how many requests, HTTP requests that I capture at this Nginx endpoint, regardless of what it is. So you still have those kinds of things, but we don't concern ourselves with that. The number one thing is making sure that we treat state correctly. So when I read that, what do we store as data? I'm assuming you're thinking of generic data about the health of the system and all of that, and that doesn't really change much from traditional ones. And I generally don't have those in the event models even. They're just part of the standard stack or SLAs that are provided by just the platform code, the stuff that's repeated for every command handler, every event handler, every read model, or state projection, if you like. So hopefully that answers your question. Just focus on the integrity of what the data is that users are seeing when you're doing event modeling. The other stuff will fit in nicely anyway. It's not something that I would try and put in at the risk of complicating what people will see as the workflow. Yeah, so that's a great question. Let's see, next one. Trying to understand how to use event modeling to improve my retail ERP monolith. 12 years old. Okay. Sounds like fun. From your experience, which part of a system like POS Inventory Accounting is best to start with? I always like event starting with where you have the highest end user interaction, because that ends up being a much better indicator of success, that you're able to address things that people see. So in what you gave me there, I would probably look at the point of sale, since people are interacting with it all the time, and let that dictate the terms of what to do next as you migrate these things. Assuming you're migrating them to be more event driven, and after 12 years, it's kind of a large monolith. It can become a little bit scary. We've worked on some really extreme examples of that, where large systems were only implemented in stored procedures. All business logic was in stored procedures, which was really horrible. It's kind of a blessing, because there's really no good IDE to refactor that stuff. It's awful. So it kind of reinforced the fact that we're on a good path to have a better default approach, and that's to look at state. So you start to look at how certain tables change without getting lost in the 12-year-old code. That's not going to really have a lot of benefits. You start to audit the changes in the tables as you go through a few example workflow steps in the old system. And you start to capture those as events in an event model, and you start to capture how you map those to those tables, because you can now develop the same thing on the side And if you need to keep the old system in sync, you know exactly what to do. So you can make these projections that all they do is fix and update the traditional things, as well as the other if you're replacing a system, the new system still works, but then anything that's attached to the old system still works as well. It's a bit of duplication, but at some point when you switch over to then replacing that other system that's connected to it, you can remove those in between state tables in the old system and just use the event straight across, because you won't have that change data capture on the other side to update the next system. So that's what I would do. But I would generally focus on something that's more visible, because it'll be more important. And the minute you show value by being able to react quickly to features being able to be implemented that took forever before, now you're doing a proper event sourced sidecar, so you can start to get way better velocity for that. Then you'll have buy-in for that, and you can start to trickle that down. But it has to be, more visible. So that's where I would start. And one of the things that's unique about event modeling is that it has UI, UX, CX at the core, at the top, because why are we building these systems? We're building these systems for people in the end. And the biggest problem with the other notations out there is that the user experience and all those things are second-class citizens, or just non-existent at all. Event modeling allows you to always speak in terms of what people are going to be seeing. Is this going to actually make something that people want to use? I don't care how crafty you are with the underneath architecture and how clever you were. It doesn't matter if people hate it. So yeah, that's why UI UX is in there. I mean, what drove it to be in there in the first place was that we just didn't have time to manipulate Figma designs and other tools. It was really our lack of budget that made event modeling encapsulate so many things, because we just wanted everything in one place instead of having to waste hours and hours coordinating information from 12 different sources, whether you're talking about UI designs, architectural concerns, user stories, etc. All of those things are moving parts, and coordinating them is always tough. So just time consuming, and high risk, because some things don't translate correctly. You need to relate way too many things where you can lose a lot of detail in how they're supposed to work together. So event modeling basically took everything you need to run a software project and put it in one place, like a large blueprint to build a house. So yeah, Boris, you're totally welcome. EventStarDB has a event chain visualization that helps debug and understand what's going on without much logging. Yep. You can use different databases, may have all of that at your disposal. You can make them yourself. They're not that difficult to do. Nice thing about having temporal data is you can walk it and take note and start indexing different IDs you run across, and then feed them through to some graphing utility and show them, right? So yeah, absolutely. If you need to trace propagation of some workflow through events, definitely look at related data with different ways of querying that. We haven't switched yet. We are switching. We actually don't use that feature in Event Store at all. I think it's more of a sales thing that people say, oh, you can visualize these things in Event Store as they all happen, etc. But I haven't come to one client yet where that was used or helpful for doing it. So it looks great. I mean, it certainly sells the product because you can show some example of data flowing through a system, and it's super complex, and you can see this graphical way of doing that. Event modeling shows you that already. So an event model will give you that answer, and so we don't ever use that feature simply because we know how everything's related, because we use that knowledge to build the system. It's not something we discover afterward. It's kind of the other way around. So I mean, it helps sell the product, which is great. It's great because then if it sells, then more people are into event sourcing. So I'm happy that it's there, but it's not something we use. And I wouldn't really ask for it. If I had an event store ready to go in Postgres or anything else, or flat files, it's not something I'd be jumping to implement right away. Event model shows it at design stage, not runtime introspection. That's correct, but you know what to look for. So in terms of us fishing through stuff, I'm usually just piping out a copy of the event store events through on the command line and using JQ to parse the JSON to relate stuff that I want all the time, not specifically just IDs, but any other information. So, and the only times that I've done that is for debugging. So, yeah, I know the guys that are working on maintaining systems here, and I don't think they've ever needed to do that. We're all just looking at the events themselves. So maybe they have a few times, but it's not something we use constantly. It's not a feature that we would miss if it went away. We'd still be able to do our job just the same. It wouldn't really be a differentiator to how effective we are. Yeah, heard about Martin. That's a .NET specific thing. So we generally try to be tech agnostic. Yeah, lots of people were doing event sourcing in traditional databases. And like I said before, we stuck with Event Store to make sure that there was a database that only allowed event sourcing to be the way that system was implemented. But now you don't need to do that anymore, which is a reason we don't push it anymore. So yeah, use whatever works. As long as you get events that are globally ordered, or at least per service ordered, you're good. So yeah. Hello. More people saying hi. Keep asking the questions. Great. Otherwise, again, if I've answered everything clearly, that's great. I'll go try and fish out some other questions. From the history on Twitter. Okay. Let's see. I am. Just checking the Twitter account. Usually there's some interesting topics that get mentioned there. Oh yeah, I should mention that there's workshops coming up. There's one that we're going to be publishing that's in person in New York, probably second week of April, most likely. That's going to be on our website. Then there's a virtual one as part of Von Vernon's series that we've been doing for about a year now, which has been very, very successful. So that's March 8th and 9th. That's coming up in about a month now. So please do subscribe to that if you want to attend virtually. Again, check the event modeling Twitter account with the latest tweets for that one. There's a link in there. And there will be another virtual one from us and the developers probably later on in May or something like that. But it's nice to be able to do in-person ones. So if you want to do event modeling with event sourcing, I'll be doing that with a couple of other people who you can discover on the Daptech website. But again, the focus is going to be 3 days, intense, all-day sessions. First day, event modeling. Second day, event modeling and event sourcing. And then diving into just event sourcing on the last day to continue with the implementations there. So, that would be April. And look out for the link and the announcement soon. So if you're in the New York area or can get to New York in April, please go ahead and subscribe when you can. Hopefully I'll see you there. I guess there's a couple of things that we talked about here in event. There's another question. Great. So I don't have to go to the Twitter feed. Car and booking, story where car is aggregate, booking is aggregate. How can we make sure the car is still a bill of booking? So this is the two-phase commit problem that people always say. Eventual consistency will give you these times where people are trying to book the same car and both look like they succeeded, and unfortunately one person's not going to get one. How you get around that is you introduce two-phase commit by having a reservation system. So your first goal is to reserve the right to rent the car, and then once you got the reservation, then you can rent the car. That will catch any simultaneous manipulation that you have, and is the standard answer to all concurrency related questions from me. And you can show it on an event model easily. So that's how we do that. And you do that by making sure the reservation system is part of the state. The minute you have state there, then you have a way to catch these problems. And you're not going to need to do that for everything. So there's definitely places where it's just going to happen once in a million times, and we never code for it because it's the time that we've ran the company, we haven't had an issue with that because there's such low odds that'll happen. A lot of systems out there think that they need to be up to the millisecond updates, and their sales is 3 people buy something a day, and like, why would you code for that, right? It's just crazy. Generally these come out to be resolved anyway, because with purchasing or booking cars, the next step usually catches the problem if there was a concurrency error. Or it's a specific domain where that is a core issue, like ticket sales for a very popular concert. Then you need to actually not treat that with infrastructure. You need to talk about that, how the business is going to take care of that high level of concurrency, because it is a business concern. It is not a technical concern. The fact that you have 1 million people trying to buy front row Madonna tickets or whatever, that is a business question. It's not an infrastructure question at that point. So I hope that makes sense. And then, yeah, you would design your system to be able to handle those situations. In the case of ticket sales, you may separate people by the last digits of their phone number. Any number of ways that you can make pre-warmed up servers that are going to serve a certain amount of users. You're going to pre-allocate X amount of front row seats for each of those servers, etc. But again, this is a design. Problem and solution. It's not an infrastructure or whether event sourcing is going to do that for you or not. This is, even if you're not doing event sourcing, you would design the system to do that. One of the systems that Eric Evans worked on in Vancouver back in 20 years ago, more than that, was ingesting a lot of stock data from stock markets, and it wasn't event sourced, but they basically ended up running multiple instances of SQL Server and divided up the problem into smaller problems, and they were able to ingest gigabytes of data. In those days that was a lot per day, and that was simply a design issue of how do you design the system to do that. It's not because SQL Server itself was better for the job. It's just that they thought about the problem and how to split the information that's coming across into a manageable, set of chunks that they could then deal with it. So same answer for your car question. Is it really a problem? What's the SLA? What happens if what's the odds of that happening? What's the likelihood? And then what are you going to do if it happens? If it's 1 in a billion, well, should you even worry? So yeah, hopefully that's that horse is beaten to death. Do you handle aggregate subtypes in event modeling where the type changes based on event in the same stream? For example, shopping cart may also change to paid order count with the same. I generally like to just move to a new entity if it's marked, but like if the whole workflow changes and I have some entity, I'm not going to morph a stream to be something else. I can relate it, but I like to be more explicit about things anyway. So that's what I would do. There's no right answer. I mean, I'm sure. But in event modeling, if it's the same thing, it would be a different projection, I guess, a different green box further down in the workflow. It's looking at the same events, but it's a projection of their state. So your shopping cart is really just a projection, and so is paid order cart. And if the source data is in the same events, who cares? So the only problem with that is if you have a different system looking after the second one. So now you're looking at introducing the automation piece in event modeling, which would make those other events jump across the boundary to another system and live there. So you have a projection in that system that you can use. Because remember, the green boxes, you find out where they're housed by looking at which swim lane they're listening to. So the green boxes don't listen to more than one swim lane. They listen to one system so that you know where to deploy the code. So that's why, yeah, there's those rules in there. It's a nice, gentle way for people on the business side to understand that they can't magically make information appear across on a different server on a different system just because they drew those boxes. They have to have the accountability for that. This stuff needs to move from this system to this other system, and it's not for free. Developers are going to have to work on it and all of those things. So back to other content. Let's see if we have anything. Yeah, we had an interesting comment by Derek saying that like a good way to discover why systems should be built with event sourcing or just tracking all information and behavior of what happens is that if you treat a system and write it like a CRUD system, then you would have and then actually watch users use that system. You would see all of the manual work and workarounds they have to do to copy paste and look at different screens to support the workflows they're actually after. So that's actually quite a nice way of saying if you use event modeling instead and you're focusing on the UI and the UX and all that, you start to very quickly move away from a CRUD system because you're starting to say to focus in on what the user needs to see at that point or what the user needs to add at that point. And generally, CRUD systems end up making the user kind of do all those things manually. They need to remember what information is related to what other information. They need to go and do that, and they get frustrated that they forgot something, and now the system doesn't give them the report with the right numbers in it, etc. So that was a good way of looking at it. So hopefully that was something you guys read, and it really does make a lot of sense. Like if a cheap, how cheap is a CRUD system? Well, probably cheap to build, but really expensive to run for users because they're not getting their needs met. Let's see if there's any more questions. Oh, hi, Nico. Super late to it. Glad the AMAs are still happening. Yes, they still are. Yeah, this is the first time again from this new office. So they'll get better with better equipment and a green screen and a dedicated machine instead of my laptop. So nice to have you, Nico. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll happily answer them. But yeah, I'm not sure if there was that much discussion on that. Yeah, Event Modeling did sponsor the running challenge for ALS. So I ran a half a marathon. That's a nice thing that happened. Ran that at 5 a.m. in the morning or something like that. Felt it in my feet. So 21-kilometer run without stopping does hurt your feet a little bit. Not sure how I would feel after a whole marathon, but half of one sure hurt. And yeah, so we raised more than $5,500 for ALS, which was great. So happy to be able to raise money for good things, and we sponsored the event with event modeling there. So some more money contributed that way. All of that, of course, goes to finding. Well, not sure how close we are to a cure, but at least more research and getting some more insight into how ALS works, and if not treating ALS, hopefully treating other related illnesses. So that was good. Nice to have some way to involve event modeling in some better goals in life and causes. Yeah, I think our team, Adaptec Group, was the top fundraiser for that event, which was good. It was nice to have so many people contribute and help out. And I'm looking forward to next year to run another 21K. Maybe I'll do it more than once. And in fact, I think we raised that in 48 hours, most of it anyway, within 2 days. So it was incredibly generous of people to chip in and all that from all around. Lots of people from LinkedIn and Twitter and other places. Let's see, what else do we have here? Yeah, Andrew Cairns commented quite nicely that visibility of system status is really good that you get out of event modeling. And that's the inside of like, hey, I can pretty much subscribe to whichever events I pick and choose to show the overall status of some aspect of my system, or all of them, to have a some way to interpret the overall status. So it's quite important, and these special green boxes sometimes end up unlocking a lot of the core problems that systems are trying to solve. You have lots of examples in different domains of how that's done. We just came out of a car insurance project where that unlocked, how certain driver programs are progressing, and how to get those requirements down on paper and off of the kind of circular kind of go around trying to figure out if you've got all the edge cases yet or not. So that's been really helpful. And so I think how long have we? Oh, we're well over an hour. So unless there's anything else, I'm going to end this one. This was more of a trial for the new space and all that. Sorry about the little bit of delay, different scheduling times. I might actually just move it to be a little bit later, unfortunately, for instead of being at 9:30 Pacific time, might have to move it to a later time. But anyway, next one's coming up, I think, in a month. So hope to see you there. That'll be after the workshop for Von Vernon. Again, look at the workshops. We'll be announcing more very shortly. So I hope to see you at the workshops. Hopefully in person in New York. That's going to be the best one. I think it's the best learning is in person. So very excited to be doing that again. And anyway, everyone, have a wonderful Friday, and hope to see you here again next month. So bye. Have a great weekend.